Now, Channel migrants could be put in warehouses under a Labour scramble to accelerate the end of costly hotels and contain mounting voter fury. Plans to roll out digital ID to curb small boat arrivals working illegally are also under discussion at an urgent ministerial meeting today. But I've got to tell you that there are big problems for the Home Secretary because her much heralded one-in, one-out deal with France has been a complete failure, with 3,567 folks coming in and 0 leaving. So, should Sir Keir Starmer sack Yvette Cooper in order to get control of illegal immigration in this country and to rescue his ailing premiership? Who better to ask than former Conservative MP and also the former leader of UKIP, the brilliant Neil Hamilton. Neil, I think we've dragged you out of a dinner party to be here. Are you in drink?
Well, I brought a little sustenance with me, but I got a bit of Dutch courage, shall we say.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. The truth is that, you don't generally mince your words, and I reckon that Rioja will help things flow more smoothly. Yvette Cooper's in trouble, probably got the worst job in government, hasn't she, Neil?
Oh, I think there are a lot of competitors for that job under this.
Well, indeed. So, first of all, your appraisal of this deal with France, the one in, one out, which has so far seen no one leaving the United Kingdom.
Well, we've had 50,000 in, of course, in the last year, or
yeah.
That's the annualised rate. Anyway, the one out that we need is Yvette Cooper. Get rid of her. Although, there's a queue of equally incompetent and useless people behind her. So, because the Labour government doesn't really believe in serious immigration control, because ever since the Blair era, where they deliberately opened the floodgates of mass migration, they were glorying in this as diversity as a means of building the right in politics out of government. Now, of course, it's coming home to roost on them, because not only are they not deriving any benefit from mass migration, quite the opposite, but even amongst the political parties, there are new political parties who now represent these immigrant groups specifically. The new Corbynite party will be particularly doing this. So Labour are being squeezed at both ends. So anything that they're now trying to do, and it's all performative, it doesn't have any real substance behind it, is purely designed to try to mitigate the disastrous consequences for themselves of the policies that they themselves were responsible for introducing 20 odd years ago, which were enthusiastically then followed up by the Tories, and whom things got to the pinnacle of mass migration under Boris Johnson. So the whole political system actually has been skewed against real immigration control for actually most of my lifetime. And now the mass of the British public are waking up to what's happening, which is really a huge social experiment in cultural displacement. We are being displaced in our own country by millions of people who are coming in from different cultures who don't want to assimilate, and the bigger the proportion of the population that they represent, the more likely it is that we are going to be strangers in our own country, as Keir Starmer memorably said just a short time ago.
Well, indeed. And of course, a portion of immigrants do integrate and start businesses and contribute to the country economically and culturally and societally. But others do not. As you say, we have these parallel communities. And as we saw during those weekly so-called peace marches after October the 7th, that there are people in our midst who do not uphold British values, not to mention the small matter of the Pakistani Muslim rape gangs, who are the very definition of the multicultural experiment, failing, and drastically so, and failing the safety of young girls, possibly 250,000. But Neil, why did things accelerate so badly under Boris Johnson? You are a former Conservative MP, and Boris will have crossed your path from time to time. I'm sure you know the guy. What possessed him to allow 1 million people to enter the country legally every year?
Well, I don't think he's really a Conservative at all. He's fundamentally a Liberal. And he's, I don't think, had many serious ideas about anything very much. He's really an entertainer more than a politician, and he had no head for detail whatsoever. He was fundamentally a frivolous individual, I think, which is why his premiership, even though he had a majority of 80 in 2019, lasted such a short time.
Neil, was he not persuaded by civil servants and others in government that we needed these people to fill the skills gap?
Well, he probably was, but I don't know whether he even looked into question as deeply as that slogan. Boris didn't really care. He was merely interested in headlines and what needed to be done to solve for today, by another headline, the problems of yesterday. So I don't regard him as a serious politician at all. But he relaxed all the visa requirements and income requirements for immigrants to come to this country, with the result that we had hundreds of thousands of people who were sort of low income economic migrants, as well as vast numbers of students who weren't really students at all, but merely wanted the title so that they could then come in themselves and then bring their families with them, which at long last even this government sees is something that needs to be stopped as a massive abuse of our hospitality. And the Tories, I'm afraid, completely wrecked our country in this respect. Labour started the rot, the Tories continued it, and it's still continuing even today, because none of these sticking plaster solutions that the government is trying to persuade us are going to do the job will work. And the problem is getting worse and worse and worse. The 50,000 across the channel in small boats is merely the tip of the iceberg. What about the people who are still coming in lorries and by other routes, the overstayers, massive numbers, and we've got millions of these people in this country. We don't actually know the true numbers because no records are kept of people leaving the country. So once they're let in, we've no idea how many of them stay here. You can bet your bottom dollar it's the overwhelming majority. And so we've now got 7 million Muslims in this country, whereas 20 years ago we had a fraction of that. Now, I have nothing against Muslims in themselves, but once you have a significant proportion of a country which is represented by a huge number of people who fundamentally have foreign cultural assumptions, then the nature of the country itself changes. And as a result, apart from the economic effects, the cultural effects ultimately are going to be disastrous. We've seen divided societies and the effect that they have. We see it now most dramatically, of course, in Palestine and the Middle East. We've seen it all around the world over my lifetime. And now we have deliberately imported this into this country, an incubus which I'm afraid was inevitably going to develop in this way. And you can't have unassimilable cultures living side by side. Once the population figures reach the kind of proportions that we're now in danger of seeing.
And of course, there are millions of British Muslims who contribute to society and who participate in the British project wholeheartedly, including, by the way, the former chairman of Reform UK, Zia Youssef, and many others. But you're right to point out that what you have here is a political, religious and cultural constituency who don't entirely dovetail with British values. We saw that in the so-called peace marches after October the 7th. And let's not forget, Sir Keir Starmer, as Prime Minister, had to... I think he was leader of the opposition at the time. He begged the Speaker of the House of Commons to scrap an amendment on a ceasefire vote in the House of Commons because he feared for the safety of his own MPs from angry British Muslims if they hadn't supported a ceasefire in Gaza. So that is certainly not rule of law. That's not the British way. Can I ask you, the ONS, Neil, have predicted that legal net migration will settle to around 300,000 to 400,000 per year for the rest of the Parliament. Where do you see the illegal migrant crossings, the channel numbers, being in 4 years' time?
Well, they may even be higher than they are now. And this is the...
Is Keir Starmer that stupid?
Well, far be it from me to evaluate, but his records doesn't really fill us with a great deal of confidence.
No, but he's a political pragmatist. What he does like is to be in power. Do you not think he'll seek to move the dial on the illegal immigration issue?
Well, but are they prepared to do what really needs to be done? Are they prepared to leave the European Convention on Human Rights, the UN Refugee Convention? If they're not prepared to do either of those things, then they can't stop the legal challenges to the policy that they say they want to implement. Ultimately, we used to have the rule of law. Now we have the rule of lawyers. Keir Starmer is a lawyer. Lord Hermer is like a vulture on the telegraph wire, sitting above him, ready to pounce whenever anything which is likely to be successful is proposed. Because these people fundamentally do not believe in the kind of Britain that you and I and most of the people of this country believe in. They believe that we are part of some vast global, diverse culture which can all live side by side with one another in a peacefulness and in a kind of a global paradise of diversity. But we all know, looking around at the world and the kind of conflicts that we see, cultural conflicts, and I'm not talking here about deliberate takeovers, invasions of countries. I'm just talking about what happens when you get cultures that are so far apart from each other, living within the same boundaries. Each is likely to rub up against the other and cause friction. And when it gets to a certain level, then you get the blow-ups. What we see in the protests around the country at the minute, at the impotence of our government in the face of what's happening, is merely the first foretaste of a much more bitter cup that we're going to sip in the years to come. Do we really want this in our country? Do we want civil disorder? Because we know from so many examples in recent history, let alone going back further, that this is the inevitable consequence of unassimilable cultures trying to live side by side with one another. Look at India and Pakistan. And what happened during partition. That's 70, 80 years ago. And we see this all around the world, where the countries are riven apart. And we used to be a tolerant country. We used to be a welcoming country. This is not something which can be sustained indefinitely.
Before I let you get back to your Pinot Grigio or your Cabernet Sauvignon, whatever it is you're enjoying at the moment, and rightly so, Neil, can I ask you former leader of UKIP, what's your appraisal of Nigel Farage? And if he becomes our next Prime Minister, can he tackle these serious issues facing the country?
Well, Nigel is a great communicator and a great campaigner, and he's done a brilliant job in creating the political force which is reform. He uniquely, in my lifetime, from outside Parliament, has had a massive effect upon the whole political system and the direction of politics in this country by, first of all, creating through UKIP the campaign for the Brexit referendum, and then winning the Brexit referendum, with which, of course, the Uni Party has done absolutely nothing since 2016, completely wasted opportunity, not least with immigration policy, although the problems we now face don't actually relate to the EU, but to the rest of the world. But whether Nigel is capable of translating himself from a kind of protest politician campaigner into a leader of a government is another matter altogether. It's a completely different set of skills that is needed. Very few individuals can manage to do both tasks very well.
Is he cut from the same cloth as your former boss, Margaret Thatcher? Does he have her pedigree, her attention to detail, her work ethic, her focus, her courage, her backbone, her vision?
Well, I don't think there are many people who would combine all those qualities as she did in her body. She certainly was a master of detail. She survived on 4 hours sleep a night. She just absorbed facts and documents, and I saw this at very, very close quarters over many, many years. Nigel is not one of those. He has his great qualities. I admire him in those respects, and he has been essential, I think, to solve many of the problems of our country, which the current Uni Party has created. But I think the jury's out ultimately on how successful a reform government would be. I think reform is shaping up at last into a party which has at least the ingredients of what is needed, but we're a long way yet from forming a reform government. Unless there's a sort of mass assassination of MPs, we're not going to have a general election for another 4 years. So who knows what can happen. But I don't see any signs of the Labour Party learning any serious lessons, and I don't see the Conservative Party even as yet having woken up to what happened in the general election last year. So I think reform has an open goal into which they're kicking balls.
Last thing before I let you go, we love having you, and my viewers and listeners loving your words of wisdom, Neil. By the end of this Parliament, at least another 200 million people will have entered the country legally, legal net migration, roughly
million, I don't think so.
Around 2 million, sorry, so say, but because you've got around eventually settling to 400k per year. With another million this year. So a ballpark of two and a bit million between now and the next election of coming legally, and 250,000 illegal immigrants based upon the latest figures, which is 50k a year. So by the next election, Neil Hamilton, has the damage been done? Is the genie out of the lamp? Is it game over for the country anyway?
Well, if the figures carry on as you predict, and I think those predictions are perfectly reasonable, we're going to need a lot of tents, aren't we? Because there isn't the physical infrastructure of the country to sustain these levels of immigration, let alone schools, hospitals and all the rest of it. These are completely unsustainable levels of migration. And we need to have a policy of mass deportation of illegal immigrants, just as Donald Trump is doing in the United States. None of the old parties has the slightest will to effect this. I hope Reform, if they get in a position to form the government of the country, will deliver on this promise. Because if we don't, then I'm afraid this country is screwed, and we're going to have mass unrest from the people who feel that they're being displaced in their own country, as well as those who've come to this country expecting a better life and are not going to get it. So, we are facing, I think, one of the biggest systemic crises that I've seen in my lifetime. I hate to be apocalyptic, but I'm afraid that's what I see.
Neil, we're so grateful that you stepped out of the dinner party. Get back to the toad in the hole and Christine's special gravy, and of course that lovely glass of Chateau Neuf du Pape. You are a star. We loved having you. We'll catch up soon.
Not sure Christine would be pleased with being called a toad in the hole.
Careful, we're in trouble. The battle axe won't be happy. Listen, thank you, Neil. Catch up soon. Love to Christine.